acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer.
Amen.
So, I'm not picking on you, Stephanie, but I'm going to talk about something that happened during morning prayer this morning because I think apparently it was meant to happen and
All right.
illustrate something here. So this morning we were doing morning prayer. We're sitting in my office, and Stephanie and I were doing the psalm responsibly, and she couldn't find her reading glasses. So she's squinting and leaning forward, trying to see the screen and things. And the psalm, happy are those who live in God's law. And then the next line was those who walk in the way of the righteous. It might be reversed. But her line was about walking in the way of God's law or walking in the way of righteousness. And she said, those who talk in the way of God's law and of righteousness. And it came up later and she didn't make that mistake. And when she even said it, you could see, she was like, that's not the word. Like, it was like, she was meant to say that. Now, I do not look at the readings before setting up for service today. So when I do preach, it's completely extemporaneous. And I look, and it was funny because afterwards they said, oh, it was funny you said that because we have a word for those people, hypocrites, that just talk in the way of the law and not walk in the way of the law. And then I pull up the readings for today and I was like, oh, okay, there we go. And that's really what these two readings are all about. Jesus is yelling at the Pharisees. There's exclamation points in the gospel, which were original. It's a joke. There's no punctuation. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He says it twice, and he talks about them, being whitewashed tombs, which is something we don't do and might pass understanding today. When people were buried in tombs like Jesus was, and they put a rock in there, a year later, the oldest son would come and collect the bones and put them in an ossuary, a box. And they'd be either held at the back of the family tomb, or in really ancient times, they would take them home and carry them with them. But the idea was, after a couple of times of being used, the tombs were not the nicest places to be, which we encounter when we hear about these whitewashing tombs. It was full of filth, so they would go clean out and they would whitewash them with lime so they were clean and they didn't smell like, what they were. But also why things like the tomb Jesus was laid in, it's very specifically a new hewn tomb that no one had ever laid in. It wasn't this carnal house. When Jesus shows up and Martha says, don't open the door, it already smells in there. He's been in the tomb, Lazarus, for 4 days. Or in the King James, he stinketh. There's this recognition of the reality of all that's going on around death that we don't get to see in the modern world because people get embalmed, people get cremated. I mean, has anyone here even seen a dead body that wasn't funerally prepared? Yeah, it's a very different thing. And I remember the first time I saw my grandfather before, he had been cremated, it was like, we should just do this because it looks way more natural. But it's getting off the point. But there's stuff going on here that Jesus is talking about with this whitewashing. It's just, we all know what these tombs are like. And when you whitewash them, yeah, it looks nice, but you know what? It's still not the greatest place in the world. So that's what the Pharisees are doing because they're talking in the way of righteousness. They're talking in the way of God's law. What does Paul say? Remember our labor and toil, brothers and sisters. We work day and night so we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim the gospel of God. He's saying, I didn't talk about it. I talked God's law, but I walked in the way of righteousness. I did the work. So don't remember what I said. Remember what I did. And I think that these two, they pair so well together. Because we always think of the Pharisees and the scribes and standing there and they make a big show of things, but then when the eyes are turned away from them, they do whatever they want. They are the hypocrites, the whitewashed tombs. And Paul, who started out as probably the worst enemy of the early church, completely reversed, and he said, just do what I did. And maybe he's even referring to that. Maybe at this point, the churches know about his history. He shows up and he gives a testimony. He says, listen to all the bad things I did, but now, here's where I am. Because if he can do it, then you can do it. And anyone can do it. It's like the conversation we were just having about the people that overcome these enormous obstacles to achieve something. And then when you meet people that are like, well, I've got a hangnail. I can't do that. You know, it's like, well, you know, when the guy with only one hand is playing guitar and you don't because you have a hangnail, it's hard to have sympathy there to say, you know what, find a way. Or the guy the Japanese man who was so racked by addiction and wanted to be free of it that he learned English by using AA's big book so that he could attend AA meetings. Be like, yeah, if you can do that, if he can do that to learn a second language, you can go to Spanish class or whatever. You see these people that walk the walk and don't just talk the talk. And I think a lot of people maybe don't like them or don't like the way that people like this make them feel about themselves. Because when you do feel that, and you do see that, you're like, oh, maybe I should have gotten up or done this thing or done, you know, I gave up too easily to do the thing that I was called to. Well, it's not a bad thing to maybe feel that way, because then the next time you have that opportunity, you're going to be harder on yourself, and you're going to say, I'm going to stick to this. I'm going to do the things that I set out to do, that I need to do, that I want to do. Even when they become hard, even when they become a burden, even when I have to rearrange the rest of my life around this to do that. So you have to choose what's important. And is it just whitewashing the tomb, or is it using a new tomb, or is it cleaning things out so that they're truly clean and are not the carnal house that is the internal soul of humans? To God be all the glory, now and forever.
Amen.